Before I start with my topic today, I do want to apologize in advance if my voice is a little hoarse and if I cough or clear my throat a bunch during this. I've been kind of sick for the past few days, but, had to get something done. So, legacy is an interesting thing. No matter exactly what we do or how much money we make, all that we truly leave behind is what people remember about us. Legacy is such a powerful thing that there are many people who sabotage their own lives or their children or families' lives in order to maintain or preserve their legacy, or at least the legacy they want people to remember. This is especially true when it comes to entertainment and the characters in that entertainment. What happens in those shows or movies or books never really happens, and yet we find ourselves pulled in and fascinated by all of it, and we put so much importance onto certain characters and hope their legacy, the legacy of some objectively unimportant fictional character, will be preserved and respected. We've seen recently just how astronomically important and divisive one's legacy can be with Luke Skywalker, between his appearances and portrayal in the sequel trilogy, and even more recently in the Season 2 finale of The Mandalorian. The absolute hype and excitement of seeing Luke in The Mandalorian, as so many of us envision him and believe best represents him and his legacy, made such a difference to so many Star Wars fans, some even being moved to tears at seeing one of their most beloved characters ever brought back in such a way that respects and even elevates who we had envisioned him as beforehand. Despite my long-winded intro, however, I'm not mainly going to be talking about Luke and what is and is not his proper portrayal and the most fitting of his legacy, but rather of his son and how inconsistent Disney has been with him. I was originally going to make a video talking about how, all things considered, Disney has actually treated Darth Vader very well. I can't speak for the comics because I haven't had a chance to read any of them, but as far as his physical appearances have gone since the Disney acquisition, all of them have been good, if not downright amazing, and have at the least not made him a worse character, and at best made him even more awesome than he already was, which I'll come back to in a moment. However, despite them showing a great deal of respect towards Vader as a character, which is great, they've absolutely desecrated the legacy of Anakin Skywalker. This is honestly one of my biggest issues with the sequel trilogy as a whole, which is saying something given just how many issues there are in it. But my biggest issue from the get-go was that it just invalidates everything that came before, and in particular, Anakin's story and eventual sacrifice, which, according to George Lucas, was the story of Star Wars, the story of Anakin Skywalker. Not to keep jumping back and forth, so bear with me, but now let's talk about how well Vader as a character has been used since Disney bought Lucasfilm, because, credit where it's due, even when in the grand scheme it ain't much, but we can at least appreciate them not directly ruining arguably the greatest villain of all time. Let's start with the most obvious one, the Rogue One hallway scene. Rogue One was a good, solid movie, but that scene is freaking legendary. That was made by a director that understands and respects the source material. Was it fan service? Yeah, probably, but who the hell cares? I still remember my eyes widening and my face breaking into a sort of middle ground between jaw-dropping and evil grin as I watched Vader just carve through those rebels like they were nothing. It was more action-packed and intense than anything we saw him do in the original trilogy, but it still felt Vader. The way he used his saber and moved, that slow, deliberate walk as he used fear as just as much of a weapon as the Force and his lightsaber, everything was just bloody terrifying and so awesome. Then you have his appearances in the Rebels TV show. It's not quite as good as Clone Wars, sure, but it's a really solid show. And while they couldn't quite show Vader's brutality so much considering it is a kid's show, they definitely captured that same suffocating fear he exudes. The way Kanan and Ezra could feel him from off-planet saying, "I feel cold," really captured the essence of Vader to me, and gave him the respect he deserves. And when Vader tells him he's not afraid, so Vader responds, "Then you will die braver than most," chills. It doesn't come across as arrogance or some sort of facade, it just seems true, and that is so much more frightening. Also, the fight scene between he and Ahsoka. Ahsoka had definitely earned her place by that time and was a very competent fighter, but it was in no way skewed in her favor, and I would definitely argue that Vader won the fight, since Ahsoka technically did die, maybe, at first. He is indomitable, unbeatable, and when Ahsoka thinks there's a chance she might be able to get through to her old master and tells him she won't leave him this time, he responds, "Then you will die," but in Anakin's voice because his helmet was cut open. Despite being nearly identical to his response to Ezra, this one doesn't terrify you, it just breaks your heart and shows the other side of Vader, the tragic side. Anakin is gone, consumed by Vader, by fear, by hatred, and even Ahsoka can't bring him back, not that easily. Even though we know exactly where his story goes, we can't help but Ahsoka does get through to him, then and there, but instead he barely registers it, just making him angry at the failure he now believes his old self to be. And then finally, his brief appearance in Jedi Fallen Order. Very similar to Rogue One in that it was just pure fear. When you first heard the music start playing, you think, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Then he jumps down and says, "You have failed me, Inquisitor," as he ignites his saber and cuts the second sister down, and then casting aside Seer without any effort whatsoever. It's so freaking scary, and you feel so out of your depth. And from a gameplay perspective, the fact that you literally can't damage him and are basically immediately killed if you try to is just so fun to me, and it really does establish him as being unbeatable, especially to a noob like Cal Kestis. So, all things considered, Disney really has done a great job with Darth Vader, which is surprising, but I'm happy about. And yet, somehow, they've also managed to completely ruin the legacy of Anakin and that of the prophecy of the Chosen One. Anakin lived a difficult, complicated life, lost himself to the dark side in pursuit of what he believed to be a noble cause, and did terrible things for years, before his son caused him to finally redeem himself and rid the galaxy of the Sith and bring about true peace and balance. Except he didn't. The New Republic apparently just sucked at their job, and the Empire was basically completely back within about 30 years, somehow with new weapons, armor, soldiers, etc., which is ridiculous, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. That was bad enough because his sacrifice to end the Empire basically didn't even work, so it was near meaningless. But at least there's no more Sith, right? Well, no, he failed at that too. Snoke was a stand-in for Palpatine, at first just because the writers couldn't think of anything better than just literally redoing the original trilogy, but then they killed him, and it turns out he was literally a stand-in for Palpatine because, surprise, turns out he didn't actually die. Or he did, but this Palpatine is a clone and raised the daughter of a different clone. Man, the movie has so many plot holes. And according to the Twitter account Star Wars Facts, though, I'm not sure if this is 100% canon or just their theory, but I assume it's meant to be canon. But anyway, according to them, Palpatine always knew Vader would betray him, and right before he quote-unquote died in Return of the Jedi, he called upon the dark power of the Force to thrust his consciousness far, far away to a secret place he had been preparing. And then 30 years later, Rey kills him all by herself because she's just the bestest. And then the galaxy is exactly where it was at the end of Return of the Jedi, but with Rey essentially being the chosen one instead of Anakin, and being the new Jedi in charge like Luke was. Completely casting aside the journey and disrespecting the creator of the character and of Star Wars as a whole, being George Lucas, of course. But it's also disrespectful to your fans that have grown so attached to the character and feel complete upon seeing the end of his journey because even though it was one of pain and tragedy, it did finally lead to peace, both for him and for the galaxy as a whole. Anakin is Star Wars, and the way the sequel trilogy, and in particular The Rise of Skywalker, completely undoes his entire character arc is so incredibly frustrating, and it will never not confuse me how they managed to do half of a character so well while undermining and eradicating the importance of the other half completely. Well, that's all I've got for this time. I appreciate it, guys. If you could leave me a like and a subscription if you want to hear me talk about more stuff that makes me happy and or unhappy when it comes to nerd things, just do that, and I'll catch you guys later.